I'm Joni Patry, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'd like to talk about famous Bollywood actress Sridevi, who unfortunately just suddenly passed away February 24th, 2018. So just recently, she had been found that she had drowned in her bathtub, and it has been said that she died of a heart attack. But I wanted to look at her chart to see in terms of who she was and what could be behind this unforeseen, unexpected accident and her demise. She was loved by all of India, one of the top actresses of Bollywood of all time. And she started as a child star, and a lot of people are drawing a lot of conclusions or comparisons, I might say, to Natalie Wood, which I just did Who's in the News on Natalie Wood. And here are these incredibly beautiful actresses that die unexpectedly way too early before their time is really up. So let's take a peek at Sridevi's chart to see what we can see surmised by looking at astrology. So looking at Sridevi's chart, she was born August 13th, 1963. The time I'm using is 5:30 a.m. in Madras, India. And with that, she has 19 degrees of Cancer as her ascendant, as her lagna. And with that, she has Venus right on her ascendant. And of course, Venus is beauty. It can deal with creativity. It deals with acting. It deals with everything to do with what she really portrayed and was all about. Her Venus is conjunct the Sun in the first house in Cancer. And Venus is just a few degrees from the ascendant, which gives her this soft beauty, because in the sign of Cancer, it's ruled by the moon, so there's this softness. And anytime Venus is on the ascendant, it gives someone grace, charm, social skills, and creativity. And Venus being in the sign of Cancer means that the moon is the dispositor of the ascendant and Venus, the planet that rules the ascendant, which in her case is the moon, because the moon rules Cancer, is very important. I call this the chart ruler. So the moon is the chart ruler, and it goes to Taurus in the 11th house. Taurus is the sign that the moon is exalted in. So whenever you have the ruler of the ascendant in an exaltation sign, it gives incredible strength and power. And in the 11th house gave her great gains throughout life. But one of the things that I find very, very important about her chart that I'm going to focus in on is about relationships. Relationships in her chart are pretty much harmed, and let me explain why. Because first of all, when Venus is too close to the Sun, it's called combust. So what that actually means is that the energy of what Venus is about is burnt. So the Sun has burnt Venus, so it's combust the Sun. And generally people that have this will have relationships that are difficult. Many times they have early relationships that do not work out, but something's flawed in the area of how a person relates, because Venus is the way that we relate to people. It is relationships. That's what it rules. And if you will notice, her Sun, which is very close to Venus, is exactly opposed to Saturn. It is at 26 degrees. The Sun is 26 degrees of Cancer, while Saturn is 26 degrees of Capricorn in her 7th house, which is the house of marriage. And when you really look at this, the Saturn opposed the Sun, you will find that there's something to do about control, that they are allowed to be controlled by others. And sometimes they lack self-esteem. But going to her Saturn is off the charts powerful. Why? Because first of all, it's in its own sign of rulership by the fact that it's in Capricorn. And secondly, it's in an angular or Kendra house. Remember, the angles of a chart, those houses are the strongest. And the angles or the Kendras are houses 1, 4, 7, or 10. And anytime you have a planet in its own sign of rulership or exalted in an angular house, we call this one of the Mahapurusha yogas, which is the yogas of great men. And this one happens to be Saturn in an angle in Capricorn. So to have a Mahapurusha yoga for Saturn, which is called a Sasha yoga, you must have Saturn in houses 1, 4, 7, and 10. And it must be in either Capricorn, Aquarius, or Libra. Capricorn and Aquarius are the signs that Saturn rules, and Libra is the sign that it's exalted in. Now, Sridevi has her Saturn in Capricorn in the 7th house. So this means she has Sasha Yoga, which means it's all powerful. This is an amazing yoga for a chart, and it gives the qualities of Saturn to a T: disciplined, focused, organized, structured, and the best work ethic you can have. So, but hers is in the 7th house. And here's another thing. When Saturn is placed in the 7th house, regardless of sign, it gets Digbala. Digbala means that this is the best house Saturn can be in. It gives it more and more strength. So her Saturn is remarkable in terms of the strength that it has in her chart. So looking at that, I also want to make note of there are certain houses that are called Marakas. And Maraka houses, Maraka actually means killer. And the fact that she has Saturn, ruler of the 7th house, in the 7th house, it serves as a double Maraka. And Maraka is actually means killer, and it does represent death in a chart. So looking at this, what is a Maraka in a chart? It is the planets that rule either houses 2 or 7, or any planets in those houses. So once again, planets in those houses are Marakas 2 and 7, or planets that rule the houses 2 and 7 will be a Maraka planet for that chart. And it just so happens the Sun rules the 2nd and Saturn rules the 7th, and they are exactly opposed one another. Interestingly enough, I will bring this up again, but she was in the Dasha of Saturn's Sun at the time of her death, and this really does come down to pointing to the power of Maraka planets at the time of someone's death. So this is something I want to really bring forth, the power of Marakas. So Saturn is not only in the 7th house, ruler of the 7th house, plus it also, in this chart for Cancer Ascendant, rules the 8th house. And the 8th house is the house of death, plus Maraka house placements do bring death, especially when somebody goes into the Dasha of those planets that are Marakas. So this is very interesting. I want to bring this forth. But also, when we're looking at planets, when they're retrograde, they also exude an amazing force in a chart. And her Saturn, on top of all of that, is even retrograde. So the dashas will prove out tremendously for the timing of her death. But let's take it, because going back to dashas. So she was in Saturn's Mahadasha, Saturn's Bhukti, so she had just entered Saturn recently. And Saturn is a 19-year cycle, but she had just entered it. And then she's still in the Saturn Bhukti, but the third level down, the Antara Dasha level, is the Sun. That's profound that is the third level down of the Dasha that she was in at the time of her death. But I also want to take a glance before we go into the transits of her navamsa chart, because remember, the navamsa chart is the chart that will tell you about the spouse. And looking at her navamsa chart, she has Sagittarius as her ascendant, and Ketu is in the first house, and Rahu Mars is in her 7th house, in her navamsa chart, her D7 chart, that tells you about an individual's spouse or marriage. Mars Rahu, in my opinion, in the 7th house, is one of the worst things you can have in terms of the future and the involvement of someone's marriage. Could it be avoided? That's a question that I ask myself all the time. Possibly, but this is part of her dharma. This is part of her purpose in life, to have experienced this difficulty through marriage and relationships. But now I would like to really dig deeper, looking at the transiting planets, because transits are always the things that kind of predict the timing of events. The dashas give the overall big picture and very specific clues to what's occurring, but the transits are the triggers. And if we put into the chart the transits at the time of her death to get a better picture of what was going on and how we can figure out what happened to her, is that Rahu, transiting Rahu, was exactly on the ascendant. Rahu was 20 degrees of Cancer, and her ascendant's 19 degrees Cancer. When Rahu hits the ascendant, many times it can mean an accident, a serious accident, okay? Because the 7th house the first house is the 8th house from the 6th. So it can predict accidents when planets transit, specifically dangerous planets, into someone's first house. So if she had, what she did, have transiting Rahu on the ascendant, that means Ketu's in the 7th house. And this is not good at the time dealing with relationships. So we have Ketu transiting Saturn. This most important planet is triggered from the dashas currently at this time. And one more very important thing I want to add about her chart that cannot be ignored. Pay attention. When somebody has a planet dealing with the 7th house that is in the nakshatra Dhanishta, they will always have problems in marriage and relationships. And maybe, yes, they can be worked out later, but initially, yes, there are going to be issues and problems. And Sridevi had her Saturn, ruler of the 7th house, in the 7th house, in the nakshatra Dhanishta. That denotes problems in marriage. So even if the planet ruled the 7th house and was in Dhanishta, it would cause problems. But once again, the Saturn serves double emphasis because it not only rules the 7th, but it's in the 7th and it's in Dhanishta. And transiting Ketu at the time of her death is very close and had just crossed over Saturn in her 7th house. So she was having problems in her marriage. And let me explain something. Her cousin came forth and said that he claimed that Sridevi was very, very sad because her husband had to sell off all of her property, most of her property, because of some deaths that he was in. And this really broke her heart. So many people say she died of a broken heart, and we're going to get more of this. No, actually, I'm sorry, it wasn't her cousin. It was Sridevi's uncle, Uncle Reddy, who claimed that she died of a broken heart because of Sridevi's husband, Boney's financial problems. And it caused a lot of grief for her throughout her life. This wasn't just at this time. And she had to give up so much of what she earned, what she made throughout life for the fault of the mistakes her husband made. So there was a lot going on that he had lost a lot of her money. So going back to the transiting planets of what happened in this case, we're going to find that not only K2 was transiting her 7th house and on her natal Saturn, but also if you'll look at her 8th house in this chart, so many of the faster moving planets were transiting the house of death. We have Sun, Venus, Mercury, and Neptune. They were all in her 8th house. Now, transiting Neptune is significant. Why? Because it deals with drowning, it deals with water. And if you'll notice, it was 19 degrees of Aquarius when she passed. Notice the degree of her ascendant, 19 degrees of Cancer. And I have repeatedly made sense of the fact that when you look at a 6-8-8-6 relationship between planets, when there's 6 houses or 8 houses from one another, this forms what is called a quincunx or an inconjunct. It means those planets are 6 and 8 placements from each other. This is the most difficult and deals so many times with death and accidents. Why? Because this aspect is relative to what the 6th house means, accident, and what the 8th house means, which is death. And not only that, Neptune was in the 8th house. So this depicts the exact day and planetary aspect that happened to the degree at the time of her death. Also take note that Neptune is opposing Mercury in the 2nd house. Mercury is the other planet in this chart that is a Maraka, because remember I said it's planets that rule houses 2 and 7 or are in houses 2 and 7, and Mercury is in the 2nd house, and it was being triggered by Neptune, which deals with drowning, which deals with water. And if you'll note, Mercury is not a good planet for a chart by the fact that it does rule the 12th house, and it also does rule the 3rd house. This is a very difficult planet for her chart. Another interesting point, talking about the 6-8-8-6 relationship, notice that transiting Pluto, which Pluto is the god of death, it was exactly at 26 degrees of Sagittarius, which is exactly an 8-6 relationship, quincunx, her natal sun, exactly at 26 degrees of Cancer. So that had the effects of death. And if you will note, Pluto was in the 6th house, which does deal with accidents, and it was precisely and exactly conjunct her natal K2. So her natal K2 in her chart is exactly quincunx, her natal sun, and Pluto sat on her natal K2 in a 6-8 relationship, all 26 degrees of her sun, which is the physical constitution and body, by the way, in the 1st house that rules her physical body. So this was very, very specific on this day. So the sun is our life force, and it also rules the heart. She had a broken heart. And if I may really say, there was many aspects in transit at the time that were activating at the time, maybe not the exact degrees, but they were all in effect. Some of them were, for example, look at where Mars, transiting Mars, was, well, it's aspecting the moon by opposition, but it's most of all, it is aspecting Rahu by its 6-8 relationship, or 8-6. And transiting Saturn was aspecting natal Mars. Transiting Saturn was in Sagittarius, and by its 10th aspect was aspecting natal Mars in the 4th house, which can revolve around the end of life, and that she died in this particular situation, the end of life. So transiting Saturn was aspecting Mars. Transiting Jupiter at 28 degrees of Libra was aspecting Rahu by its trinal aspect. And all of these planets on top of that were transiting her 8th house. So to really determine what is the cause of death here, I'd have to say definitely it dealt with a drowning. Why? Because the Neptune aspecting the ascendant degree and the Mercury. But that we're dealing with natal Mars in the 4th house. Saturn was aspecting it. The 4th house not only is the end of life, but it also represents the heart. And on top of that, we see that Rahu was right around the sun, which is the indicator of the heart. And additionally, Pluto was exactly in a quincunx aspect, which quincunx is an accident. The sun is the heart. So I'd have to say that Sridevi died from a drowning and a heart attack, which is what they surmised was the cause of death. Now, many people are suspecting that the husband had something to do with it. And I'm not quite sure that he had something to do with it physically, but inadvertently, he definitely had the effect because she died of a broken heart. The sadness affected the heart. The relationship issues affected her heart. And she died of a broken heart. Brokenheartedness causes heart attacks. Now, if per se he did have something to do with it, I doubt the truth can come out with all of the Neptune transits being involved. Neptune keeps things secret. But if a chart lives on beyond an individual, beyond their lifespan, then I believe something could come to the forefront during the months of May through November, when transiting Mars will transit into Capricorn and cross over her Saturn, ruler of the 7th and the 7th, while she's in the Saturn Mahadasha. This could be the indicator that brings out the truth during these months when transiting Mars goes into Capricorn. Mars is going to go into Capricorn, and it's going to stay there because Mars is going to go retrograde back and forth with Ketu in her 7th house. And I suspect that the truth can come out at this time, because in my analyses, I have found that your chart does live on beyond your death. And we will see the truth this summer. So stay posted and watch as events evolve through this mystery of Sridevi's chart. So with that, I'd like to close. If you would like a transcript of this analysis, you can go to my magazine, which is astrologicmagazine.com. And if you would like to learn Vedic astrology, go to my university, which is University of Vedic Astrology.com. And for more information about me, and if you'd like to schedule a reading, go to my website, which is galacticcenter.org. Thank you.